Welcome to Power Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Obviously, lots going on in politics. We've got a mayor's race happening. We are voting early, hopefully, for propositions, which is going to be the big topic of discussion, Jeronimo, this week, because there's a lot going on at the state and questions about why we have to vote so much to amend the Constitution so frequently are definitely coming up among people who look at the ballot and say, to me, why we have all of
amend
these
the Constitution.
things. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but obviously, the saddest news of all is that the Astros sadly lost. Now, did they lose because of poor pitching, lack of situational hitting, or was it the Ted Cruz curse?
I think Ted Cruz. I mean, you have been keeping the stats.
Yes.
What's this?
Unfortunately, the Astros are 0-5 this season at home when Ted Cruz is in attendance. So that's not a great.
Yeah.
Now, they're not winning at home generally. Is it Ted Cruz's fault, or is it, the kind of MLB taking Abreu out? Well, we don't know, right? But this does lead to some political questions, because we're going to also talk about the Senate race, which is heating up. You've got the Democrats who are raising a bunch of money, trying to compete with Ted Cruz, who's going to get a big war chest. So lots going on there. But obviously, all eyes this week are on Gaza and on the Middle East, because this is a continuing crisis happening. We're seeing some delays because Israel's trying to negotiate to get some of the hostages out. But obviously, this creates a massive political issue for the U.S. The president was on TV asking for help from Congress to fund Israel and the Ukraine by a huge number. And I think this
help
is
to who?
Yeah, it's definitely going to help him, maybe. But I want to ask you this, because he's trying to make this case that he thinks that basically his presidency can be made and then his reelection secured by this kind of foreign policy moment. Do you think that that's true? Is that something that might be useful for him?
I think so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least his chances are going to increase, right?
Okay.
And the reason behind that is, well, first of all, you have a number of U.S. citizens are hostage in Gaza, right? So that's, obviously a very, very, very intense problem.
Yes.
And also they have to come up with a very, very good solution for that.
Yeah.
So that's one issue. The other issue is that Israel has very deep political ties with the U.S. And those ties, have always bring, political partisans together.
Yeah.
Democrats support Israel, Republicans support Israel, and the general public as well. So I think that if he is careful enough and he threads the line in that regard, I think that he can increase his chances. Now, obviously, if that doesn't happen, he can blame Congress because we are Congress-less.
Well, that's a great point, actually. And I thought the same, where this is a sharp moment for the president. He can basically point to the chaos happening in the House and among the Republican caucus and say, look, they can't even pick a speaker of the House, like a leader that they all agree on. And here, I'm going to act as president, right? And these moments are potentially stunning, right? I mean, this is a president traveling to a foreign nation that's in conflict. You've got the president giving Oval Office addresses. This is the most presidential
thing, right?
Yeah, like literally the stuff we kind of carve into monuments. And so it's useful for him to be able to develop this, but obviously it's risky, right? The last president who really was able to win on foreign policy alone was probably George H.W. Bush after the Gulf War. Now, I know you weren't born yet, so you're very young, but that's a long time ago. And so I think it's worrisome. But I also want to note, for the kind of general context, as you said, that the public tends to support the president on this. In fact, you're seeing polling that suggests that half of people responded after the attacks that Israel was justified in striking back. You also have about 54% of people who approve of Joe Biden's handling of that conflict. So that's about the best he can do. And honestly, given where things were, pretty good. So I do think that kind of running a foreign policy presidency has its advantages. And for Joe Biden to be able to talk about sort of functionally preparing and sort of keeping democracy, that's his general approach. And it can be both abroad and at home. And I think that's kind of where he's going to draw that sharp contrast with the Republican candidates, likely Donald Trump, but there's more to it, right? So there are other candidates involved, like Nikki Haley, right, who's got a lot of foreign policy experience. Does this help her in the election, trying to basically unseat Donald Trump from what's likely the nomination?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, why not?
Yeah, well, because, having policy expertise doesn't mean anything in this political
right.
day and
Coming
age.
from somebody with a policy degree.
Like, I have a lot of policy expertise, right? But I don't think anyone would elect me to anything.
I'd vote for you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. But
that's one.
Maybe if I vote for myself,
you could vote
it's going to be
yourself.
embarrassing. But the question here is, can she outwit Donald Trump into that?
And as important enough as an issue to really define the race.
Yeah,
I think
because,
you're right.
former President Trump is going to say no one is, friendlier-ish, whatever, and supporting, blah, 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 Israel than me, right?
And he'll get a bunch of
moved,
Israeli flags. And
right, he moved the embassy.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, there's like...
Yes.
So if you say, the geopolitical realignment of Middle Eastern politics with Israel, heavy defense.
I feel a yawn coming on. I'm sorry.
Boom.
Right.
Maybe.
No, you're right. And actually, too, we're in a moment where the public is much more insular than they were, say, 50 years ago, you know what I mean? Or even during the time of the Gulf War. The public is concerned about the economy of the U.S. And so it's sad to say, but like what's happening abroad, although it's terribly, problematic and obviously really troubling, is not something that is going to be like a major issue for most. Like a beleaguered economy here is going to outweigh foreign policy issues in other places every single time. So I think the president probably has to think about that carefully. But obviously, I think the contrast with the Republicans is pretty big. And that's another kind of subject of discussion. It's the ongoing speaker quest. Jeronimo, we are about 25 days with no Speaker of the House. This is a major issue because they have to, govern occasionally. So we're at Halloween times, and I see this as like The Walking Dead. You've got the Republicans who are just trying to find somebody who can serve as that leadership role. What do you think? Obviously, they're still fighting. There, at this point, as of our recording, about 8 people who are still in the running after the various other people have come and gone. Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise and a bunch more. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, I have, I see 2 things.
Okay.
All right. The first one is, I know you love Halloween, but I see this as a early Mario Brothers game, right?
Gotcha.
That you can just not jump that breach, and you always fell in the middle, right?
Right, okay, yeah.
And then, you have to restart the game 11,000 times until you get it.
You got to commit to those jumps.
Exactly.
That's the key. And if you don't,
exactly know when to jump. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that, the Republican conference in Congress, I think there's 4 important groups, right? Yeah. You have the MAGA loyalists, right? Those hardcore MAGA loyalists, Trump supporters. Then you have the MAGA rank and file that, may or may not ideologically agree with some of those political premises. Then you have the MAGA I don't want to, but I also don't want to lose my re-election, right?
So politically savvy.
That, it's like, MAGA is not very good, but I just don't want to get in trouble.
We don't want to cross over.
And then you have the anti-MAGA, right? Okay. So each of these groups hold a little bit pieces of the conference.
Gotcha.
So you just need, one of these groups to say, no, I'm not going to support you. Okay. And then everything falls apart.
Gotcha.
And the question is, who among these 8 candidates and perhaps later less number of candidates are going to be able to at least get a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and create a coalition? I don't know.
It's a great question. And I think the big picture is exactly that no matter who wins, they're going to have to preside over this conference that's divided and bitter about the other groups. And I think your breakdown really makes sense because they're looking for somebody who can speak. They're looking for somebody who can speak to each of these groups. And that's increasingly hard, right? And actually, too, like if you think about the big picture here, like why is this happening? I mean, we can talk about the day-to-day and the minute-to-minute, literally, right? Who's in, who's out. But the big picture, I think, is worth exploring. So, for instance, part of the problem is that you're seeing a decline in power of the party in the House. Little by little, you're electing, since the 1990s, people who are individual. They don't think about the party. They don't think about, the kind of trajectory of the House, they think about themselves. And that means you've got these individual actors who are then willing to challenge the power of the speaker. And that's exactly what happens. And so although Newt Gingrich was good at kind of, making sure that the party maintained its stability, they set in things like term limits. They set in limitations in terms of seniority. So they basically limited how much power the party had. And that's now come back to bite them because now all these individuals have this power. They can raise their own money. They can go on social media and, do whatever. And it makes them basically the focal point. And they can basically take out their aggression on the speaker to say, like, if they don't like the direction of the party, they're mad about whatever policy is coming up, they can basically look to the speaker and say, you're in danger. So like Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, John Boehner, right? They all basically, got, sort of Julius Caesar level stabbed and, or maybe Mike Myers level stabbed if we're going to try to keep the Halloween theme.
But I mean, you see Paul Ryan, right? Yeah. And Paul Ryan now is looks like a complete moderate, almost socialist, right?
I thought you were going to say he was like tanned and handsome and like just like happy that he was not a speaker.
I'm sure that he's happy, right? I'm probably sure that he's, his cholesterol is in check, blood pressure is in check.
Totally normal again.
Right. Hasn't lost his hair or anything like that. Right. But when you saw him this past weekend doing the press rounds, you literally said, like, this guy is right. Yeah. It's a complete mess, and it's a guerrilla warfare within
just everybody
the
out for themselves.
Conference.
No, I agree. And the thing is, too, like, no matter who wins, they're going to match up against the minority leader in Hakeem Jeffries. They're going to match up against the Senate Majority Leader on the Democratic side, Chuck Schumer, against the President, Joe Biden, against even to some degree their own party, Mitch McConnell. That's collectively 140 years of Washington experience. This is Party Politics. I'm Brandon. This is Jeronimo. Speaking of votes, we're going to talk about the election because we are currently in the middle of early voting. Hopefully you've gone to do it. If you haven't gone to do it, please go out and do it because there's a bunch of stuff on the menu, right? Constitutional amendments abound. And so that's what we're up to this week and next. And then on the way through Election Day, Jeronimo, interesting stuff happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have total of 14 amendments that go from preventing municipal governments from regulating land use policies in areas with farming, ranching, timber production to property tax relief.
That's the big
one.
And
everything in between: parks, water, broadband.
Yeah, totally right. And I mean, a lot of people ask kind of why we amend the Constitution so frequently, and it's basically a remnant of the way the Constitution was written. And this is actually true for a lot of southern states, but basically it's easy to amend the Constitution, right? You only have to have a simple majority or 2/3 of the majority in the House and Senate. You don't have to go to the governor. It goes right to the voters who have to approve these by a simple majority. So that low bar is definitely creating an opportunity to do this. And Texas's constitution is weirdly structured, right? It's a kind of statutory constitution. So if you want to make these changes that are embedded in the Constitution, you've got to be able to actually ask the voters for it. So that's why we're voting on like bond questions in El Paso and whether or not Galveston should have a treasurer. Right?
Correct.
It doesn't affect everybody, but it's in the Constitution, so we all have to vote on it. But there are some big ones, like you say. Property taxes is a big one. Talk about that. What does that mean for Texas voters?
Well, first, I mean, the caveat here, or not the caveat, is that you are an expert in that because you have 2 or 3 editions of Texas politics books, so you know about all these little
these little nuances.
Nuances on Texas politics. But it's Proposition 4, and Proposition 4 is important because it's going to raise the homestead exemption for school district taxes from $40,000 to $100,000. Also, they allow to limit the value of a property that is not residence homestead, like for secondary use or something like that. All your vacation homes across the state are going to get that.
I'll leave that break. Thank you.
You're good with that. Also puts a temporary limit on the amount of school district taxes for people 65 and older and disabled residents. So that's also, a good proposition. And then finally, it's going to limit terms for appraisal board members to 4 years to those serving in a county with less of population of $75,000.
It's a lot. And there's this kind of argument that it's too long, and people would definitely vote for tax relief. That's not a question at all. In fact, actually, apropos your point about sort of how this amendment goes, indeed, sir, I just ran these numbers, but basically anytime the voters are asked to cap, reduce, or eliminate taxes, they pass by 84%. So it's a very good likelihood that it'll pass, but it's so awkwardly worded, and they really all are, right? So you have to really honestly do your homework before. Don't wait until you get there to read it, because it's really clunky. Like the Secretary of State translates this bizarre language, and you probably want to look at the regular translation to it, so you can see what it really does.
Language,
Exactly. Into plain terms. So please do that, because this is definitely
it is
what
very
you want
long.
to do. But basically, as you say, this would just reduce property taxes by the tune of say $100 to $200, depending on how much your property is worth. And then the appraisal district is interesting, right? That limits how many terms or how long people can serve on these individual boards, because that's been a concern too. People say, well, the problem isn't so much what the tax rate is; it's the increase in the amount of worth of your home that keeps going up, the appraisal of it, and so that's something that's definitely kind of makes that.
So tell me another one. What about number 5? Proposition number 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think 5 is a big one for Texas universities, obviously for those that are not in the permanent university fund like UT and A&M. So a lot of people don't know this, but basically the permanent university fund was set up in the 1800s. They had this land that was settled that they used that were going to eventually sort of sell as they needed to be able to fund the university. But it turns out that there's something super valuable under the land.
Like what, dinosaurs?
It's dinosaur wine, as Kinky Friedman used to say, oil. And so obviously this is a huge boon to Texas universities, A&M and University of Texas, but no other university got access to that. This would proposition would allow for other universities to have a separate set of money like UT and Texas Tech and North Texas. So this is definitely going to be a boon for them. But I think this is in keeping with a lot of where these propositions are. It's basically yes if. This is a situation where if there's money and the legislature puts money into those funds, then they'll have money. If they don't, then they won't. There's not a permanent source of funds where that'll flow into it. Like in other times, there have been sort of structured so that they skim off some money from the permanent or from other funds that automatically flow in. So for instance, the rainy day fund, they'll skim off some of that and dump that into, transportation. But in this case, they're not doing that. So the same is true here for stuff like, there's an energy fund, broadband access.
Correct.
We said research funds for the university. These are the kind of things where if there's money and the legislature decides to put that money in those funds, then they can use that money for it.
And these proposals, like you said, number 5, the broadband, water, parks, so on and so forth, are so important for the future of the state.
Yeah.
Just to mention, for example, when you look at California, in terms of public universities, most of the UCs, the University of California system, are considered one or the best productive research tier 1 institutions. Like UC, for example, has a lot of the member universities, UCLA, Berkeley, Irvine, et cetera, are members of the American Association of Public of Universities, right? And that's
a prestigious rank.
It's a very prestigious rank because it opens the door for more federal funding, et cetera, et cetera. And in order to be competitive, right, in terms of, just simply keeping up with demographic growth in the state, we need more of those universities there. Not because, universities want money, but it's the future of the state. We are creating the human capital that is going to give us that economic advantage that we have had for many years. So it's extremely important to invest in these things, as well as broadband, as well as water. Because as we have said before in this program, water is going to be the next war. And it's very important to start thinking about that seriously and putting our money where our mouth is.
Do you think Mad Max is a Halloween movie? I guess it sort of is. It says futuristic sci-fi. Maybe we'll classify it. But you're right. And and basically the state's going to put money into all these things if there's resources. And that's a big if, because we could find that doesn't really work out.
But it's better that it's there.
It's better that there's an option, right? But I want to ask you also about Proposition 13. This is one that would raise the mandatory minimum retirement age of state judges from 70 to 75 and would set the retirement age at 79 instead of the current 75.
Right.
A lot of people are mad about this because they're saying basically it lets the current crop of justices stay in office for longer. It doesn't lead to turnover, which in principle might lead to some party change. Do you think that's true, or is this just a reflection of the fact that, people are living longer and we should let judges stay on the bench for longer?
I mean, yes, people are living longer, agree. But, we have seen some of these problems that we have seen in the U.S. Senate, right? Where the average age is 80 or 75 or whatnot.
Right.
And, I think that our public officials and elected officials need to be kerned, right? And, we discussed this last week. We have, the mayoral leading candidates. Yes, very, very good candidates, very astute, a lot of experience and everything.
Yeah.
But we see that disconnection, right?
Yeah.
And I think that raising the age limit, it's a matter of those people that want to be judges, to not be able to start their career and then they're going to get laid there and it's going to be the same thing.
Gotcha.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of longevity in office, let's talk about the Texas Senate race, which is heating up. We've got a lot of money flowing around this. U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who we mentioned earlier, is obviously potentially a curse for the Astros. We'll see. We need more data on that. But it's a joke, obviously. We don't know that that's true. It'd be hard to make that case. But one thing you can make the case for is that he is making bank. He's raised about $5.5 million over the past 3 months and now has got about $7 million in his war chest. But he is being caught up to by others, including Colin Allred, who raised about $5 million in the third quarter and they got about $15 million on hand. He had a 20-1 edge over Senator Roland Gutierrez, who is the other candidate, who's only got less than $500,000. Carl Sherman, who's a representative from North Texas, only has about $83K on hand, so it's not going super great for him in terms of fundraising. Does this show that the race is set and Allred's in better shape and will win, or is this just kind of too early to tell?
No, I mean, obviously, you just need to follow the money, right?
Yeah.
And I think that eventually, it's not a done deal. He has an easy way or easier way to outspend his opponents. But you never know, right? Because, the Democratic Party and people that might be involved in the primary are also very, value-oriented, right? And, most of the attacks that have been said is that, Allred is another DC type person. So it's the same.
And Gutierrez is tackling him on the border issue where Biden had to spend this money because Congress allocated it, so he could not do it. But obviously, this created a problem for Allred and maybe an opportunity for Gutierrez. So it could be interesting.
Right. So it's, the establishment versus the anti-establishment, right?
Yeah.
So what we're going to see is these, it's the same argument that former President Trump used, right? Yeah. These established politicians are not getting that got traction in the Republican Party.
Interesting.
Might work in the Democratic primary here in Texas. I don't know, but we'll see.
We'll see. Well, another thing that happened this week was that Dan Patrick, who's been called on to give back this $3 million donation/loan that he got from Defend Texas Liberty, has been sort of resolved. He's going to, instead of giving it back, he's going to buy Israeli bonds. So less than 2 weeks after this PAC leader was met with this Hitler admirer, literally, not joking, that basically Patrick finally said that he would give this money back in a way, but this is Dan Patrick turning lemons into lemon bars and really like Hakeem Olajuwon in the paint, just moving right around the problem, right? Dade Phelan says, you all should give the money back. This is terrible. Standing up for the moderates. And Dan Patrick says, well, I'm not going to give it back, but I'm going to do this instead so we can help Israel fight terror. Do you think this is a savvy move from him, or do you think he should have just kind of given the money back and done what everybody else did, or most people did?
I think it's a good way because he needs to extract political point because there's no denial, right, who this person is, and that's it, right? So I think that eventually, it's a move to extract some political points, save face, and perhaps, say like, okay, end of it. But I don't know if Speaker Phelan is and, moderate Republicans are just going to leave it there. I don't think so.
I don't think so. The last thing real quick that happened is that Sheila Jackson-Lee is running for mayor, is known as a bad boss. But this week, audio was release that basically has her berating staff in a terrible way, using awful language and just being, frankly, pretty mean. To me, this is one of the worst kinds of scandals, one that's true, or one that basically resonates with what people already think, right? They already thought she was a bad boss. Now we have evidence. She apologized, saying, she's just intense and sometimes the moment gets best of her. Do you think this is going to have an effect on the mayor's race?
I don't think it's going to have a significant effect at the end, right? Because, we know that Sheila Jackson-Lee is very polarizing. Yeah. Not only as a boss or whatever, I don't know her boss, I guess, style or anything like that. But politically speaking, is either you support or you don't support her. Yeah. So Sheila Jackson-Lee supporters are going to support her.
Yeah. It's not going to bring down her negatives because they're already pretty low, right? So
okay. I don't think it's going to have a significant impact. And, we're going to find out in a couple of days.
Well, time to vote. Yeah,
exactly.
Got to get out and show your voice.
Don't forget to vote early. It's easier. It's fast. And go all the way down the ballot. So we'll keep an eye on all these things for next week's. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.